World Geography Chapter 3 is all about human geography, the human aspect of the world we live in, why people live where they live, why they do what they do, and the ways in which they interact with each other. In the first part of Chapter 3, we're going to study the world's people in its population, why people live where they live and how they might move and interact in these different places. Secondly, we're going to take a look at the culture of these places. Each people in different parts of the world have a unique culture. We're going to learn how to understand and have a little bit of way to compare our own experiences, our own cultures to those experiences and those cultures. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at how these different groups of people and cultures interact in what would be a worldwide economy, the different types of trade and transportation and commerce that happens that connects all the different parts of the world. I'm excited to study this really important aspect of geography, the human aspect, because it's the easiest thing for you and I to relate to. We share this world with the people that we're studying and the places that we're studying, and we have the ability to interact with those people in the forms of our technology and transportation today. So let's dive into this. This is going to be really, really important and hopefully build some of those important life skills for you to experience the world and the human geography aspect of it. Chapter 3, Lesson 1 in the chapter on human geography. Our lesson is titled The World's People. In front of you, you should have your notes page. It looks just like this, Lesson 1, The World's People. Our essential question is, how do people adapt to their environment? In this first part of Lesson 1, we're going to take a look at Earth's growing population and the population patterns section. In the next lesson for tomorrow, you're going to specifically focus on what would be population movement. So for today's note-taking along with our reading and video, you're going to just fill out this initial section right here. It says use your textbook to answer the following questions, answering 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the second section, population patterns. Our directions for that section are to use your textbook to decide if each statement is true or false. Write T or F in the blank. If a statement is false, rewrite it correctly. That means rewrite the statement. That's why it gives you plenty of the space to rewrite that correctly. In that second portion on population patterns, you're going to take care of numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, you're saving this for tomorrow's lesson. We'll specifically study population movement and break that into 2 different parts. Let's dive into it. I'm on page 72 in your textbook, and you can follow along using that textbook, or you can use your online textbook. Earth's growing population. First aspect that you're going to read about is the causes for population growth. Now, why is our population growing? And the 2 things that you're going to factor in as you read through this are what are called the death rate, the rate at which people are dying in our world, because at every second in the world, somebody is actually unfortunately passing away. But at the same time, there are births that are happening all around the world at the exact same time. And what's going to measure if our population is growing or is getting smaller is the aspect that there's more births happening than there are deaths at the exact same time. So on page 72, you're going to read through the causes of population growth, and then on page 73, the different reasons for the growth rate that are happening in our country. What I would think about in terms of why our population is growing is the aspect of where we are in form of medicine and technology in today's world. Are there better advancements that are going to allow births to be more successful? Are there better advancements that allow people to live longer? That would mean our population is maintaining its overall number because people are living longer, as in deaths are happening less because it takes longer for people to get to that actual life expectancy because that life expectancy has been exceeded. On page 74, you're going to learn about the challenges that come with increased population. Increased population results in dangerously overcrowded cities. A lot of times when there are places that have a lot of population, they're moving to cities because cities have different types of resources for them. There's different types of housing and education and maybe jobs that are available, but at the same time, if there's things that are overcrowded in cities, disease outbreaks can happen because people are in such close proximity to each other. If you look at what's happening in COVID right now, most of the major outbreaks are in major cities because people are so close together. There might be job shortages, there might be poverty, crime, and pollution that's happening in these places that are overcrowded as well because people are trying to fend for themselves and find a way to continue to live and survive in this world, but there might be too many people in one area for the resources to support those people in that location. Another aspect is the effect on the environment. What happens if there are too many people living in one place to the environment? Well, the people that live in a place, they use those resources in that place. If there are too many humans in that place that are going to be using those resources at an excessive rate and need to somehow make up for that. So that can oftentimes cause the environment to kind of be pushed to the side or not even thought about in terms of wanting people to survive and continue. So they kind of overuse the environment or might even pollute the environment to a point where it's really, really difficult to try and recover any of those things. In the next section on page 75, you talk about those population growth rates and what happens when we have those raised population growth rates. Rapid population growth harms the environment by depleting these natural resources. And in certain places where there's massive population, there are needs for other things such as jobs, healthcare, and education. However, if there's too many people to support what would be the need in that area, a lot of times those things can struggle. Children in these areas affected by extreme poverty don't usually receive education that other people might experience in different parts of the world. There's oftentimes when there's overcrowding or higher population, there's often low income associated with that or job shortages because there's not enough jobs in a specific area. A lot of times it works best if those things are spread out, but people, for whatever reason, because the resources are sometimes available in cities or it's maybe easier to live in a city than to live on your own, is to actually be attracted to those places where there are others that can even help you live together. When people are relying on each other, a lot of times that's what creates that growth rate or that increased population in a specific area. Lastly, the birth rates in many parts of Asia, Africa, and South America are higher than industrialized nations. That might surprise you. We might say, well, here in America, we have an industrialized nation. We don't consider ourselves a third world country. We've got paved roads, we've got electricity, we've got water, we've got access to food and healthcare and education. We should have this really great place to actually support a population. But in places that actually don't have those same type of industrializations or modern technologies, modern developments, there's actually higher birth rates, and that might be associated with the culture of those peoples in those places. So in Asia, Africa, South America, those birth rates are actually higher than industrialized nations for a specific number of reasons that you'll find out in your reading. Now, after you've read through what would be page 75, you're going to come to the portion on population pattern. But before we jump into that section, I want to check our understanding right at this point from that first section, all about the growing population in our world. What factors contribute to Earth's constantly rising population? That would be the fact that the birth rate is higher than the death rate. There are more people that are being born and therefore living than there are dying, so population is increasing. Why are people being born more than there are dying? Well, that's because modern advancements in technology have allowed our healthcare system to extend what would be the life expectancy. If you'd go back simply a couple hundred years, people would be expected to live a lot shorter life than they are now. I think the average life expectancy now is to between 75 and 80 years old, where 100 years ago, 200 years ago, you're probably going to be a lot lower and maybe to the 50s or 60s. So if people are living longer, that means there are more opportunity for the population to increase in that same amount of time. What's the difference between birth rate and death rate? Well, birth rate is the rate in which people are being born. Death rate is the rate in which people are dying. At the same time, simultaneously, every second in this world, this is a fluctuating number in terms of our overall population because somebody's being born right now, and unfortunately somebody has perished and somebody's died right now. If there are more people being born at a rate than there is more people dying, that's where you see that population increase. And your book actually talks about how there's this prediction of our world being able to support a population up to 9 billion people, and it says that the population is predicted to increase all the way until the year 2050 and then taper off and maybe decrease at that point because the living population is going to only get older and older and older during that course of time. Population patterns on page 76. In this portion, you're going to read about population distribution and population density. And I'm going to put this little bow tie at the bottom of the page to help you understand this in terms of a comparison between these places. And then I'm also going to use it to compare urban and rural places, because this is the difference between kind of where people live and where those populations exist. The first, number one, the geographic pattern of where people live on Earth is uneven. People don't just naturally spread out to all different aspects and all different parts of the world. Our distribution, population distribution, is usually based on where people can find the things that they need in order to survive. So our basic needs are food, water, and shelter, so where you live. And then after that, you've got to be able to provide for yourself and provide for your family in the economic system that our world has. So you have to be able to have a job and have some type of income, whether it's you're self-employed or working for a company, or you have a way in which you're getting some type of assistance or help, or people are working together to provide for a family, or your parents are working to provide for you. There are ways in which people live where they live, and a lot of times it's associated with the job that they have. So these population patterns are uneven. People don't just live in all different parts of the world and spread out. They live where those needs are going to be met. People center where those resources are, they meet those basic needs. That means that they're only going to go where they can make sure that they have all these things to continue to survive. One way to study population is by measuring population density. Now, population density, as you read through that paragraph at the bottom of page 76, is all about how many people live within a square mile. That's a measurement of the density, the number of people that are living in a particular area. The more people that live in a specific area, the higher the population density. That would be called an urban area. If there's a low population density, people are spread out, that's going to be called a rural area. Only about 15% of Earth's surface is actually inhabitable. Inhabitable means it's actually a place where you can't live. Habitable means that 85% of our world is a place where somebody could live. Only 15% is a place where people can't live. A lot of times these are going to be in the mountains, in the drastic elevation changes, and in the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, because of that increasing cold. Now let's take a look at our bow tie. This is kind of what I used as a Venn diagram. You can see on the left side, right side, you've got two differences, and in the middle portion of that bow tie, we would call those things the same. Population distribution and population density, how are they different? Population distribution is the geographic pattern of where people live on Earth, and this is uneven. The population density is how many people live in a specific place. How do they have something in common? Well, they're both talking about the population and the influence of those patterns on our world. In the next section on page 77, you're reading about where people are located, and the difference between those are often considered urban and rural. So if you use our bow tie again, on this left-hand side, you call this an urban area. On the right-hand side, you call this a rural area. How would you describe the differences between those, and then what would actually be the same? Urban area means there's a lot of people living in a specific area, so your population density is going to be higher. A rural area, people are relatively spread out. There's low population. What's the different, or what's the same thing about them? People live where they have their basic needs met. So you might live in a city, in the city of Milwaukee, and there's a higher population density because of obviously your parents' decision to live in this location, or your family's decision to live in this location. Well, on the opposite hand, there are people that live in small towns, small cities all across our country and all across the world, in really rural areas, maybe because they have their needs met in those locations as well. But a lot of times it's all based on where people can have those simple basic needs met. Let's check our understanding. Why do more people live in some parts of the world than in others? This aspect comes back to the idea that people live where their needs are met. Over 70% of our population lives near water. This can be associated to the historical aspect of transportation. The best way to travel in what would have been the age of exploration was by ship. By ship, you're moving by massive water bodies, either by sea or by river or by ocean. That would mean that the first place that you're going to come to, the first land that you're going to come to, might be the best place for you to actually settle that land. Now, the aspect of where Milwaukee is located on Lake Michigan is a really good example of that. A lot of trade that comes into the port of Milwaukee that you can see right down here, right down by Summerfest, is where those ships come in, bring goods right through here, through the Great Lakes. It's also kind of how Chicago is settled in that location as well, but Chicago uniquely is positioned with the different railroad systems that were developed to create this kind of midway point or checkpoint from what would be the East Coast to the West Coast. So a lot of times these developments and these places where people live were based on historical aspects of transportation. A lot of the major cities in our world are located near bodies of water, and then that development happens with the continued development of trade and economic activity. If there's trade and resources that are coming to a place, that means that there's jobs coming to a place and a lot of different places for people to work. If there's a lot of places for people to work, people are going to live and move to those places. Give one example of an urban area and one example of a rural area. Here's an example of an urban area. Obviously, Milwaukee is an urban area. It's the largest city in the state of Wisconsin. Madison would be considered. Chicago is a much larger city than either Madison or Milwaukee because of the surrounding area, the Chicagoland area. There's many different suburbs or parts of Chicago that extend for a great deal in what would be most of northeast Illinois. Other major cities, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, Atlanta, Denver, a lot of major cities have a high population. Those are considered urban areas. Example of a rural area, well, Mr. Shane, where he's from, the town had 1,200 people in it. My high school, because of the size of the town is small, a lot of times your school is going to be small. My high school, I had a total of 200 people in it. I only had 50 people in my graduating class. In fact, our school was so small, they took the middle school, 7th and 8th graders, and they put them in the high school to make it worth it to have that many students and that many teachers in the same building, because our school was so small. I lived in a relatively rural area that had small towns, a lot different than what it's like to live in a large urban area with lots of people, lots of activity, a lot of things going on economically and for basically your entertainment and livelihood, what you're doing on a daily basis. Very different way of life in that time period. Now, to make sure that we have the first two sections covered, again, you're reading through Earth's growing population, the growth rates, population challenges, effects on the environment, and population growth rates. Then you're reading about the world's people in the aspect of population patterns, population distribution, population density, where people are located, and right here is where you're going to stop. Population movement we'll save for the next section. Remember, in your assignments, you're taking care of questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the first portion, and then your true-false questions in the population pattern section, 1, 2, 3, 4. So answer those 8 questions and complete today's reading. Thank you.